questions, feel free to use the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that on the back end. And again, we hope you'll enjoy today's employer panel discussion and conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Miss Alyssa Cordy.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt. I'm glad we got Peter in the room. So it looks like we have all three of our employer panelists. So thank you for the introduction again, Matt. And again, just a huge thank you to each of our employer partners for taking time out of each of your busy schedules to network with us tonight and, share some of your valuable industry experience and especially your work within each of your respective cities. So students, thank you for joining as well. The way that we are envisioning that this event will work tonight is we will start off with a few moderated questions just to kind of get to know our panelists. And then for maybe the last 30 minutes or so, depending on the crowd that we have stick with us, I was thinking that we could jump into some breakout rooms segmented by the city and also the employer organization. And then students, you can kind of have an opportunity to naturally network with each of our panelists and jump in and out of rooms and ask them questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So today joining us, we have Peter Waprinski, and he is the Vice President of HR and Organizational Development from Assurance America, and he is joining us from Atlanta. So hello, Peter. We also have Rachel Shore. She is the manager of sales from the New York Islanders Hockey Club, and she is joining us from New York. Fun fact, Rachel is also a UT alumni, so we are happy to have her join us. And then finally, we have Brian Pospisil. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. He is an inside sales recruiting lead at Zones, and he is joining us from Chicago. So with that, I guess we will start it off with our first question. We'll go ahead and kick off with just a brief introduction of yourselves and what city you reside in, and then maybe talk a little bit about the roles within your organizations. So did we want to start with Rachel? We'll start with the alum first.
Sounds good. Hi, y'all. So I'm Rachel. I am originally from Virginia, and I went to school at the University of Tampa. I'm very fortunate where I've actually lived in a few different cities, but I now live in New York. My whole career, I've actually worked in sports. I was very fortunate enough at UT to work for the Rays in their box office, the Blue Jays spring training facility. I did some internships with some minor league teams as well. That sort of helped me set me up for my career. And I now am with the New York Islanders as a manager of sales. So what that means is I oversee our ticket sales. So whether it's a group, season tickets, partial plans, mini packs, anything having to do with more than just a single game kind of runs through our department and runs through our sales reps. So I oversee about 8 reps as well as our groups department and really help hone in on how we can make the most out of but how can we sell the most while also making sure our clients have the best experience when at our games. And we're actually building a brand new arena. So my experience during this COVID time, the last year and a half, is a lot different than other teams just because we've been able to focus on a brand new project that's going to be opening in November. So definitely have a very unique experience kind of when it comes to sports and COVID.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. Brian, did you want to go ahead and kick us off next?
Sure thing. Thanks so much for having me, everybody. My name is Brian. I am the inside sales recruiting lead with Zones based out of Chicago. So I am really here to help the team build out our sales office locations in a variety of different markets. And so just to kind of back up and tell you all a little bit about Zones. Zones is what we call a VAR in the industry, which is a value added reseller. And so we don't manufacture anything strictly a reseller, but basically we actually partner up with leading technology solution brands, whether it be Apple, Dell, Microsoft, Cisco, any brand like that, to in turn provide customized technology solutions to customers like Nike, Target, T-Mobile, Starbucks, the list goes on. But again, really just that IT reseller, and our edge is that we're able to be very consultative and work with that customer directly to have a customized solution. And so I actually was brought on pretty recently to help build out our sales offices across the United States in places like, of course, Chicago, but also Dallas, Minneapolis, on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon, Atlanta, a few other locations, but that's a little bit about me and what I'm doing here at Zones.
Thank you so much, Brian. All right, Peter, we will let you take it away. Sorry, Peter, hold on one second. You are on mute. Here we go.
Okay. So thanks for your time, guys. I hope you find this little session informative. I'm over here at Assurance America. We are what's called a non-standard automobile insurance company. Non-standard, another phrase for that is minimum limits. So the people that have our insurance, basically have insurance for approximately $25,000 to $50,000 of coverage. And it's a neat industry, the insurance industry, and I've really enjoyed my time here, where there are so many different parts to the business. In the insurance business, our product, what we sell is the policy. So we've got a team of actuaries and really strong data analysts to determine the price of the policy, and they have to look at risk and frequency of accidents and severity of accidents. It's a highly data-driven role and very statistical oriented. And then we've got other groups within our company. We've got a sales team. We've got claims, which is a big part of our business. We've got our customer service team, of course, HR and IT and accounting, the support functions to the business. And relatively new over the past several years, a big part of the insurance space is going directly to the consumer, not using an insurance agent. So, through your mobile app, you could buy insurance. You've seen the commercials. And we've got a division that is growing significantly in that area. So it's just a fun place to be. And that's all about our company and what we do.
Thank you, Brian, or thank you, Peter. All right, so we will go ahead and move on to the second question. So for this one, I want to talk about a little bit about some of our regional connections that we have here. So again, we have the cities of New York, Chicago, and Atlanta represented. So for this one, I'd love to hear from each of the panelists, maybe talk a little bit about kind of your overview or your journey out of college, and specifically how you got to your city. So if that was your hometown and you just moved back there, if you took a job, or if you took maybe a set of jobs that led you to your current city. So we'd love to hear kind of your journeys of how you got to where you are now. And we'll mix it up with this one. Brian, do you want to go first?
Sure thing.
Awesome.
So I actually went to a pretty small school in central Illinois. So I actually grew up in the Chicago suburbs, made my way about 3 hours south down to a town called Peoria, and went to school for 4 years there. But as a kid, as long as I could remember, I always told myself that I wanted to live in the city. I went here for field trips a lot when I was a kid, and even just like on family weekends and stuff like that. I just always knew it was a place I wanted to live. And so that was my end goal. And I had a really great internship within HR down at a healthcare system in Peoria. And they offered me a full-time role post-graduation, but I just knew that central Illinois was not for me. I was actually, as I was getting into my 4th year, I was getting a little ready to stir crazy and ready to get on and upwards with my life. And so I took a little bit of a pause, made my way back home. Lucky enough, I was able to go back to my parents in the suburbs and kind of figure out what was going to be next for me. And so then it actually led me to an opportunity with a previous employer where I was really able to kind of start to build my career down here in the city. And so I started out as a recruiting coordinator and then really kind of worked my way up the ladder. But I've been in Chicago ever since, a year after living at home from post-college, and been here ever since. But I've always had that little travel bug inside me. And so I've always tried to align myself with a role where I'd be able to do some traveling, which is also kind of how I found myself here. With that previous employer, we recruited at this school and a number of schools down in the Florida region. And while Zones doesn't have office locations there currently, that's definitely something that could potentially happen further on down the line. And as we have all mentioned here today, there's opportunities across the country that we could consider you all for.
Thank you, Brian. Rachel, did you want to jump in next?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm from Virginia. Obviously, I went to school down in Tampa. Right after graduation, I got a job in St. Louis, working for the St. Louis Cardinals. So I moved there for a year and did not know anyone. It was probably the best year, most challenging year right out of college. It's always very difficult, sort of that transition into like the real world. But really great opportunity in a really great city. In sports, most of the time you get a position within inside sales, and it's typically a year, maybe 2 years. But the Cardinals position at the time was only a year long, with the hopes of getting there or having your feet in sports and moving on to another team. So I then was fortunate enough to move out of St. Louis, and I moved to Boston, where I was with the Red Sox for 6 seasons. Really great opportunity there. I was able to progress my career. And then, kind of like any other opportunity, this position kind of presented itself. And I was at a point in my career where I was ready for more. And unfortunately, the Red Sox just didn't have any positions like what I'm doing now. So I moved to New York. I never wanted to live in New York. I'll be very transparent. I tell people that all the time. But there are a lot of things and pros of why I took the position. And also, as I got older, I have more family, and pretty much all my family on the East Coast. And so I knew I never wanted to move to the West Coast. I realized I wanted to stay on the East Coast. And so the opportunity kind of said, I'm not going to move somewhere because I don't really want to live in the city for a silly reason. And so I moved to New York, and I have been here 2 years, and I love it. So the one thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to move somewhere. Nothing is forever. And I've lived in 3 awesome cities and have very different experience, and not from any of those cities.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, I definitely love that advice. All right, Peter.
So I grew up in the Northeast, went to college in Pennsylvania, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Franklin and Marshall. After I graduated, I moved down to South Florida. And I started my career working for, at the time, was the largest company in the world, Exxon, in their computer division. They had their own office equipment and computer division back in 1980. And my first job was selling fax machines before anybody knew what they were. So, it was great because you had to sell 2 because they had to communicate with one of them. No one else had them. There's no such thing as Staples or Office Depot or Costco. That's not where you could get a fax machine. You had to buy one from a rep like myself. And I did that for 3 years in other office equipment, small computers. And then I decided I wanted to get into the small business world. So I became an IT recruiter. And I did that for approximately 6 years in South Florida, and loved it. I was with a company you guys might have heard of called Kforce. They are headquartered in Tampa. I was one of the first partners there back when they were approximately 10 people. When I joined them, I left, we might have been 100 in our group. And I left before they went public, unfortunately for me. But it was a great ride. Kforce was a great case study. You should look it up, and how they became the organization they did become. But anyway, when I decided to leave, it wasn't a very scientific approach. I had a non-compete. Like I said, I was in South Florida. So I looked at a map and I said, what was that? The biggest city north of Fort Lauderdale. And that happened to be Atlanta. So I ended up in Atlanta. I had never been here before. I didn't know a soul, but I started a recruiting firm here. And I did that from 89 to about 2016. And it was an IT staffing firm, but we did stuff in addition to IT staffing. And then I retired from that firm. And then last year, Assurance America was a client of mine for about 10 years. And they called up and said, hey, how would you like to be the VP of Human Resources and Organizational Development? I said, well, that's different. That could be fun. I could do that. So I ended up here, and I've been here for a year. It's been a great ride. So that's kind of my journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. Such an interesting journey, and you truly just never know where life's going to take you. Awesome. All right. So with that being said, the last question that I had was for each of the employers to kind of maybe discuss some interesting trends that you might be seeing within your cities. Maybe it's particular areas or industries that are growing, maybe the current state of the economy, if there's any like interesting fluctuations that you guys are seeing or new development and living areas within your cities. And then finally, just some advice for new professionals who are maybe looking to relocate to your city. Maybe some advice for how to get settled in, how to look for jobs and network, just any advice that helps you when you move to the city. Who do we want to get started? Does anyone want to go first?
I can go first. That's fine. Yeah, for sure. So in Chicago, I would say due to COVID, a large number of people historically were going to be downtown in the apartments, right? Living in the city, having that city life. A lot of people have actually kind of reevaluated and have moved to the suburbs. It's actually been really great. You know, for me and some of my friends, we've been able to snag up some pretty cool apartments for pretty cheap, which is awesome. For anyone who might be looking to relocate to Chicago, you know, this upcoming summer, the prices are still pretty low. So I would say that that's one trend that I could definitely tell you about. But it looks like things are getting back to normal. You know, I live right off of Michigan Avenue. And if you don't know anything about Chicago, it's like right where everyone who is a tourist comes. It's a super, super, super cool place. I love it so much. But now we are seeing that hustle and bustle start to get a little bit more back to normal. Definitely very strict on our COVID policy and procedures here. So very much so masks and socially distanced meals, and you can only have a certain number of people at a table. But we are seeing that uptick. We are seeing more people coming to the city. I have noticed, you know, just within the recruiting industry that a lot more roles are opening up. There's a lot more postings that are available online. So that's all really great. But in terms of someone who's looking to go to a new city where you might not have been before, obviously now traveling is a little bit more restricted than it has been previously. But if you can get to that city just to get a feel for what it's like, I would highly recommend that. Friends or family, if you have them in the area, take advantage of that. And something that I've noticed too is if you have a family member, or maybe you're originally from the Chicagoland area and you're looking to come back from Florida, if you're using your Florida address versus your Illinois address, an employer is going to think you're relocating when in all honesty, you're just kind of circling back to where you were from. So be cognizant of the address that you're using on your profile would be one of the biggest things that I can share. And if you have a resource, or like I said, a family or a friend in a city that you know you want to utilize or that you want to relocate to, see if they're okay with you using that address, because I think that sometimes an employer might look at your profile and just, you know, throw your application to the side solely because of the location that you're from. And especially as a new grad, if you're looking to relocate, sometimes that can turn some people off. So if you have a resource, it's not, I mean, definitely be transparent about that in the interview process. I'm not telling you to lie or fib, but make sure that you're leveraging the resources that you have to make yourself stand out as an applicant would be one piece of advice that I have for everybody.
Yes, good advice. I mimic that what you just said about the applicant and updating your address on your resume. And also it's such an interesting trend with the apartments in the cities, how a lot of people are moving to the suburbs now. Unfortunately, that is not happening in Tampa. Our rent is still as high as ever, but I've heard that with some of the northern cities. So very interesting. Rachel or Peter, did you guys want to comment?
Sure. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, perfect. So I echo everything Brian said. New York is seeing the same trends. Actually, New York just opened up. Anyone 30 and above could start to get the vaccine. And I was joking with my friends, like in a few months, the city's going to just be back to where we were a year and a half ago, which is exciting. So not to repeat myself or to repeat anything Brian said, but the one advice that I would give when you're moving to a new city and may not know anyone is think about what you were involved with maybe when you're in high school or college and see if there are any groups there. I was involved in a youth group in high school and it's actually nationwide. And so when I moved to St. Louis, I went and volunteered. When I moved to Boston, I volunteered. And in New York, I volunteer for the same organization. And it's nice to just find like-minded people who have the same sort of interests that I do. I was in a sorority, so I seek out, sorority alumni groups. I obviously love sports, so I find like women's sports organizations or, any intramurals that I can do like as an adult. So trying to find sort of a sense of community, because it can be difficult. But the biggest thing I would say is give it a year. Nothing is going to be forever. Do feel like you have done everything, but really give it a year before you say, I can't do this and I want to leave, because you're never going to really feel like home, especially in COVID. I moved to New York June of 2019. COVID obviously hit February of 2020. And so I really can't say like, I don't like New York, because I haven't really experienced it. And I think we're going to still feel that way. Even, for unfortunately, probably a year to 2 years after this, things aren't going to be 100% back to normal. So just be cognizant of that. Understand that it's going to take time to really feel like you've made your roots, but do everything you can to sort of build that community with different organizations that you might feel connected with.
Yes, such good advice. Thank you, Rachel. Peter, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure. As I mentioned, came here to Atlanta, almost 30 years old, didn't know a soul. And I love it here. It is I think, a great city. Whether you're single, starting a family, have teenage kids, there's so much to do. It's so easy to get around. And there's something for everyone. The thing I love about Atlanta is, you can find all these different things. Anything you want to do, you can find it. It's so accessible. If we're looking, for quote advice, the one thing I would just recommend is, if you think you want to live somewhere, just spend a day there, spend 2 days there, see what it's like. See if maybe it's by a highway and there's noise, or there's a lot of traffic, or this or that. And then take the drive at 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever time you start work, from that location that you're thinking about living in, drive to where you'll be working during rush hour, drive home during rush hour. So the more things you can do like that to know about where you settle down, probably the easier it will be for you. I think, if you have any questions about Atlanta, I'd love to answer them for you, but it's a great place and relatively inexpensive for a big city. Our housing prices are low, our rent's low, and there's so many different areas in the city where you can live, where you'll be close to work, and a lot of mixed communities are popping up, where you've got apartments, homes, retail, commercial, where you can live in these communities and walk to whatever you need. So that's Atlanta.
Thank you, Peter. Brian, did you have something to add? I saw you.
Yes, I did. And so I think that was a great call out, Peter, about just kind of, walking through what your commute and all of that stuff looks like, because that is super important. I mean, right now, you probably would have to add a few minutes onto that commute, just kind of given the current situation. But one other thing that I thought of when Rachel was talking about relocating to a new place is leveraging social media. I know there are so many Facebook and Facebook groups and all these other different kinds of, whether you're trying to find a roommate or get information on where to live, leverage those resources. There are so many people that are in the same exact boat as you, and you might even end up finding like a roommate or something like that through it. I know that it kind of brings back memories of when you're looking for a roommate for your freshman year of school, and that's probably far beyond what you're thinking about now, but definitely would encourage you to leverage those platforms to see what you might be able to help yourself out with there as well.
Yes, definitely. Oh, sorry, you go ahead, Rachel.
I was gonna say, the one thing I would add is, like, Boston, everyone uses Craigslist to find apartments, which sketched me out, but that's like what they do. So I would definitely use your resources, understand how people find apartments or even roommates in the area, just to make sure that you're really kind of getting the full experience and finding the best deal as well.
Yes. And to Brian and Rachel's point about social media, I was just going to add that that's actually how I met with Rachel in the first place in Boston. I was going to Boston for a trip, a work trip, and I reached out to Rachel. I saw she was a UT alumni, and we actually connected through LinkedIn. We set up a little date and got coffee, and then we've kind of had a partnership ever since. So to Rachel's point, definitely, and Brian's, definitely leveraging different social media outlets such as LinkedIn. They have alumni filters, so many different filters that you can select from. Really is a great resource. All right, so at this point, that was kind of our 3 questions that we had for the panelists. We do have some time to jump into some breakout rooms, but before that, do we have any questions that we wanted to ask kind of like as a group to each of the panelists before we jump into those breakout rooms? All right, well, it sounds like we have some good questions that we want to ask the panelists individually. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms then. Peter, Rachel, and Brian, I've assigned you each to your own room. And the way it'll work as the guests can kind of jump in and out of the rooms and then kind of manage that themselves. And students, if you are having trouble jumping into any of the rooms, just hang on and then we can get together afterwards and I'll place you in a room. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and open these up. And just another quick note, we are planning on wrapping up around like 5:30ish. So we will return back to the main room around then.